All about the big GM recall on this episode of Talking Cars. Welcome to Talking Cars with Consumer Reports. I'm Tom Mutchler.
I'm Jake Fisher, and today we're going to be talking about the GM recalls, a safety recall of many, many vehicles.
Yeah, it's been in the news a lot. You know, when a car company's in the news on the front page almost every day, it's very seldom good news, and GM's had a lot of bad news recently. What's the problem? You know, what's causing all this?
All right, so the problem is it's a situation where the key can shut off by itself. So someone's knee can hit it, or actually even an extra weight on a keychain can actually turn the engine off. And when that happens, you could lose power steering, you could cause a crash, and actually they said about 13 people at least have died because of this. The real big issue here, though, and the reason that there's all these types of congressional hearings, is that this is a problem that GM knew about. In 2005, there was a service bulletin that went out to all the dealers and said, there's a safety problem. This could happen. We recommend you retrofit it with some parts. Not all the cars got fixed, and the cars were never recalled. So it was a service bulletin. They call them TSBs, Technical Service Bulletin. It goes to dealers, and the dealers will say, well, if someone is complaining about a problem or something like that, we'll look into it, or perhaps you'll fix the car when you see it. But it's different from a recall. A safety issue, honestly, should be a recall. And they are finally recalling these vehicles, but 10 years later.
Right, I want to back up a little bit and sort of step through the steps. So you have an ignition switch that shuts off way too easily. And when that happens, like you said, you lose control of the car, you lose control of steering. It also turns off the airbags.
Yeah.
So you have a car you can't steer, and then the airbags are shut off.
We did do a video on that where we actually explained what to do if that happens to you.
On any car, not just the affected GM cars.
On any car.
And how did we wind up with these cars having such an under-engineered part?
So I mean, here's the thing. It's like many cars are recalled. Safety recalls are not something really special or only that GM has. But this vehicle, when you look at the Chevy Cobalt, I mean, we tested the Chevy Cobalt.
Yeah, twice. It wasn't one of our greatest experiences.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a very good car then, and it isn't a very good car now. Even now, we look at reliability information, and it's not pretty. So, I
mean, you can understand the appeal though, because GM was selling surface level options. They were selling what looked to be a fairly well-equipped car, for a couple $1,000 less than a Honda Civic. And you can understand people going out and buying these now, because you can buy a say, 07 Cobalt, or you're getting like an 01 Civic with a lot more miles on it.
Yeah, so I mean, the key point you talk about there is a couple $1,000 less. So, I mean, at the time when they're selling these cars, it was always a $3,000 rebate that GM had on the hood of everything. And they were honestly building vehicles around a price point. So there was a tremendous amount of cost pressure to make sure that this car is cheaper than the competition. It didn't really seem like they were selling cars to really compete head-on-head with the Civics and the Corollas of the time.
No, because the Cobalt sure didn't.
And it sure didn't. But the competition that it posed was a $14,000 out-the-door car instead of a $17,000 out the car.
Because Civics cost money. I mean, it kind of brings us to the deadly calculus of safety. It's been a big week for safety stuff. And I want to go back through a few things and how the money plays a role. NHTSA's had a busy week. At the beginning of the week, they announced mandatory backup cameras. By 2018, everything under 10,000 pounds. That's going to add $70, $80 to the price of a car. Tesla, a week before, they announced that if you want, you can have your car retrofitted with a titanium shield that covers just the very front of the battery, some aluminum extrusions. That titanium part, that's what, about $60 for that part?
It could be $60 or $70 on a $90,000 vehicle.
Exactly.
It's probably not going to break the bank.
And there's the thing. To improve the Cobalt ignition switch would have cost 58 cents back in the day. But the calculus is very different for each one of these examples, because if everyone has to have a mandatory camera, everyone raises the prices. Okay. If you're selling a $90,000 car and you're making 25% profit on it, partly because you don't have a dealer network to share the money with, okay. But 58 cents on 3 million cars that you're never going to make a profit on, that's sadly huge.
Yeah, so the big issue there, again, is that the cost pressures that they had at the time. Now, a lot of people are asking about, what does this mean for the new GM? So this is something that Mary Barra was talking about. The new GM is going to do this, and there was the old GM, and we've talked about this before, the post-bankruptcy GM and the pre-bankruptcy GM. Right. And you could interpret a lot about our comments, but we here do believe that there is a big difference between the post-bankruptcy and the pre-bankruptcy GM. It is operating as a different company, and the way the cars are being sold are completely different. So no longer are we looking at vehicles that, the small car, right? The Cobalt. Well, it's got to be a $14,000 vehicle. Now
no, the Cruise is an expensive small car.
The Cruise is, and that's what they're doing. They're actually putting the content in these vehicles now and competing head-on-head for content and price with the Civics and the Corollas or anything else.
The other thing is that, I'm sure some pundit somewhere is very eager to make this into talking about the bankruptcy, talking about the restructuring that happened under Obama. But the fact is that the restructuring actually made them able to build better cars, because one of the reasons the Cobalt was going to be price incompetitive is that they were dealing with old UAW contracts at the Lordstown factory, which was always, things were never smooth at the Lordstown factory. They were paying for a jobs bank where you could send people to sit and not work. Now the cost structure is different, so it lets them put more money into the car, which should give you a better car.
Yeah, the cars that we've seen, certainly there's the Cruise. We're looking at some of their new vehicles like the Impala. The content that they're putting in these cars, they are not nickeling and diming these cars at all. It seems like this is something that's really, really different. Another thing that seems really different is the way they're treating some of the problems. Now, again, recalls, just because a car gets recalled doesn't mean bad car, dangerous car,
it's good.
whatever.
It's good. Get the car fixed.
But what it is about timeliness. The recall should happen as soon as you know there's a problem, not 9 years later.
Sure, and that's a lot of the things that's coming out. The GM thing is that, they found out on a pre-production Saturn Ion back in 2001 that they were having a problem with this. There were problems at the press launch.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people at the press launch, one of the pieces of advice we gave is don't have a bunch of stuff on your keyring. I'm sure people at the press launch didn't have a bunch of, their house keys on the keyring. All this stuff was happening. But like you said, they're trying to get in front of this. They're trying to help customers as much as they can. They're renting cars. They aren't all going to be GM. You're basically paying for your customers to get in a new car from somebody else, but they have to help people out. Also, the whole issue of old GM and new GM, that old GM could shelter them a bit from the liability. But Barra announced that they're setting up a compensation fund run by Ken Weinberg, who set up the 9/11 fund. So he's very experienced in unfortunately, the calculus of death of compensating people for their injuries. They're trying, but there's a lot of pieces to this.
Well, here's where the math really comes down. And the math is that if you want GM to survive, GM needs to go and make this right. And what they're doing is they're taking a page from the Toyota playbook.
Oh, sure.
So Toyota, big minutes about the sun acceleration, the floor mats, we've all heard about that. They were just saying, tell me where to write these checks. How do we make this better? Let's recall all the cars if we need to do that. And that's what GM is doing. They're doing everything they can do to get a reputation to know that this is not what they're doing now. And that, again, the math, the dollars and cents, does not make sense to try to save money right now.
Right.
Because
they're going to spend money.
They're going to spend the money because they're investing in the future and what people are going to think about GM as they're going to go in the future.
Because Toyota had a very similar problem. You go back through the years and you can see where Toyota had engineers inside that were arguing about sticky accelerator pedals and floor mat problems, and those problems never got fixed, or they got fixed by sort of half-assed recalls or half-assed service campaigns or customer service bulletins or whatever. To the point where a couple weeks ago, Toyota basically, they entered a plea agreement basically with the Department of Justice saying, we're going to give you $1.2 billion.
Yeah.
For one count, the most expensive count of wire fraud ever. But, they just they're writing the check to try to make it go away.
And this is what GM is doing. They're saying, yes, things were bad in the past. We're going to fix it. We're going to make sure that it's right. And that's totally what they really need to do to get that reputation back.
They're also doing what Toyota did with fixing all the cars that are out there. You figure once you're in the swamp, you might as well get completely dirty. Recall everything. If there's any sort of problem that you thought might possibly be a bit of an issue, recall it.
Right. Well, and actually, there's another thing that they're doing, and recently there was a stop sale on the Chevy Cruze. They're one of their newest vehicles, and a stop sale is where they're saying, okay, we're not even selling this car. If a customer comes in and says, I want this car, take my money, please. They're saying no, because there might be something wrong with this car. We're going to make sure that it's right before it gets into your hands. That is a very costly thing for them to do. Mm-hmm. They could easily say, okay, well, we'll look into it. Maybe we'll recall it later. But now they're not only quickly to recall the vehicles. There has been other, quick recalls going on this year, but stopping sale of this vehicle until it's right. So, I think the upside of this is, certainly there's the congressional hearings and everything, and we're looking into what they did wrong, but the upside is, hopefully this is just a statement to all the car manufacturers that it does not pay to hide something that's wrong. It pays to put the money out, fix the cars as soon as you can, make sure they're right, because it's going to haunt you. It's going to hurt you way more in the future.
That's right. I think the other lesson it might have taught you is be very careful of Schadenfreude. Don't throw glasses in stone houses. Because back when Toyota was going through all this, GM was advertising, hey, you own a Toyota? You want to come worried about it? Want to come over to us? We'll give you some money off of a GM car. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of delicious irony. The other thing it's also showing is sort of the limitations of NHTSA, the limitations of our safety regulatory system, in that it's very, very difficult to go through the defects database and get anything out of it. The fact that NHTSA is greatly underfunded. They have a lot to do, and they're very smart people and they're very dedicated people, but there's not a lot of them. Also, the fact that there's a bit of a revolving door, that often it's not that big of a community. That often people work at NHTSA, they leave, they go to a lobby firm, they go to a car company, it's all back and forth.
Well, it's unclear exactly what happened, and hopefully that'll be figured out. But the facts are this: in 2005, they knew about this issue. Somehow, a recall was not issued. Whether or not that was NHTSA, whether or not it was a GM, whether or not it was a combination of both, the system didn't really work. Mm-hmm. And hopefully going forward, we're going to make sure that the system works.
We do, because you don't want this to happen in the future. So that's going to wrap it up for this special episode of Talking Cars. We'll be back next week with another episode. So thanks.